Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Sabbath Gift. It's such a pleasure to have you guys joining us. My name's Trent, and this is my lovely wife, Erin. We are so excited to have you join us as we are on this journey discovering what the gift of the Sabbath can be for each and every one of us.
Now, we would love to know, where in the South Pacific Division are you watching from? We understand that this has been promoted far and wide, and we would love to engage with you as participants of tonight, active participants. You can type your questions for any presentation, related questions that you may have, into the chat. But let's start off by saying, where are you watching from? Where are we watching from tonight, Trent?
So we're here at Lake Macquarie in New South Wales.
So just north of Sydney. It's a beautiful part, and it's been such a beautiful mild winter day as well.
Lovely day today. So please send in, where are you coming from?
Now, if you do need assistance viewing tonight's program, please go to our Zoom meeting ID that's coming up on the screen right now. This is the number for the Zoom meeting ID, and select captions, and it will enable you to experience the fullness of tonight's episode as well.
Now, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome. It's so exciting to have you. And for those that joined us last week, we had the privilege of hearing from Dr. Christiana, who shared with us about the health benefits of the Sabbath. And Erin, what were some of the highlights that you took away?
Yeah, Dr. Christiana Lamina presented beautifully. There was some amazing research that she drew on, talking about the impact that keeping the Sabbath has on your longevity. So we found out that it actually brings 10 to 11 years in addition to a normal average lifespan, and talking about positive effects on mood as well over that Friday, Saturday period.
Yeah, actually from that as well, I loved how it told us and shared with us the how people who were in those areas where the Sabbath was kept, there was a reduction of death also on the Sabbath. The Sabbath day had a reduced number of people that would die.
That's fascinating, isn't it? And we saw increase in productivity and in resilience.
Yep. It's amazing to see that there's such a great advantage. Wow, we have people coming from Toowoomba, Queensland.
Hello,
welcome.
Helen. Blessings from Rotorua, New Zealand.
Awesome to have you guys joining us.
I love that.
That is so exciting. I loved her analogy, but where she talked with us about being plugged in like a phone charger, and how we need to plug in and connect. But she shared that when we connect to, say, like a battery bank to charge our phones, we can get on a little bit of an extra time or a little bit of extra charge, but it still leads to needing to go to the source. We need to go and connect to a solid source to fully charge our phones back to 100%. And we as humans need the same thing. And the Sabbath allows us to have that opportunity to connect in and recharge. I love that analogy.
Really powerful concepts there. So for those of you who did take up the Sabbath challenge last week, we want to know in the chat, what did you get up to and how much of a blessing did you find it? Because we know that the Sabbath gift really is that. It is a gift. So we're keen to know what you got up to last week if you took up the Sabbath challenge, and was it a blessing to you?
Erin, what did you get up to for the Sabbath?
Last week, we after church, we had lunch with family, and then in the afternoon went for a walk down by the lake, and then in the evening saw other family, and that was just a total bonus, because in the work-life balance, it's hard to justify catching up with people sometimes. So it was awesome.
Yeah. So once again, everyone, if you have a question that you might have towards our speaker tonight, please use the chat function. Send in your questions so that we can actually ask those questions after the talk in our Q&A segment.
Awesome. So our presenter tonight is Brendan Pratt. Pastor Brendan Pratt pastors for Australia. He's married to Amanda. He's an author and a father to 3 boys. Busy household. Correct me if I'm wrong, Brendan. Are they 21, 20, and 16?
That's correct.
Wow.
Yikes.
Full on.
All right. I can just imagine all the smells that come out of those rooms. No, I'm kidding. That's so cool, Brendan. And I understand that there's a bit of a reptile theme going on as well. What are some of those reptiles that are featured in your hobby list?
Reptiles are my thing, and I'm not coming to you from my house, but if I was coming to you from my house, and on my desk I'd have a frog sitting here. There's a dainty tree frog, underwater saurus gecko sitting on this side. I've got bearded dragons, blue tongues, got a desert sea swimmer, a Woma python, a diamond python, got a really
What a
cute jungle python. I just love reptiles.
That's so good.
Totally, you love reptiles. I believe that actually from your description. And all these reptiles are located back at your home in Melbourne, Victoria. That's right.
Melbourne, yep, Melbourne's where I live, so that's where the reptiles are.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much, Brenda, for coming and joining us and sharing with us this evening. And we're going to hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Trent. And thank you for the invitation to spend some time chatting about Sabbath and disconnecting from the world and what that looks like. It's an area of interest. In fact, I got a little bit excited about this whole area, so much so that it's what I did my PhD research in. And so my research is on consumerism and faith development. And one of the aspects is, how does Sabbath interplay with consumerism? So consumerism, first of all, what is it? What are we addressing? Consumerism is the folk religion of our culture, if folk religion makes sense. What do I mean by that? That every culture has official religions, but every culture has a folk religion where people look for hope, for meaning, for purpose. You and I, if we live in a Western culture, then consumerism is just the pool we're swimming in. It's every day, from the back of buses, from billboards, from my phone, from newspapers. It's telling me I don't have enough, that I need to have something more, that I'm discontent with that because I need that. And so that's just the world we live in. Consumerism isn't about how much you have or don't have. It's your attachment to what you don't own yet. So you look at what you don't own yet and you think, if I could get that, then that's going to make me happy, or that's going to make my life more meaningful, or that's going to have me more fulfilled. So consumerism is the attachment to what you don't own yet. Consumerism is built on the premise that the goal is, and if I was to ask you, what's the goal in life, or what's the goal for our culture? Well, whether we explain it like this or not, for most people, it's to be happy. When parents hold a little baby, when it's just been born, what's the goal for your baby? I just want them to be happy. And it sounds so wonderful. And so we make happiness, we think it's a right. Well, in America, we put it in their rights. We make happiness the goal. How are you going to be happy? Well, consumerism gives us that answer. It says, if you have enough things, then you'll be happy. Or if you had more things, or that experience, or that thing, then you'd be happy. So we're told that if I could get enough things, then I'd be happy. You know that if you won a big lotto prize, you'd be happy, hey? Well, it turns out that in actual fact, you might have a spike for a moment, but you go back to, and Robert Banks does the research on this, you go back to the level of happiness you had before, or often less. What's going on with that? But anyway, you and I think that if we had it, we would be happy. So we think that things are going to generate happiness. How are we going to get things? Of course, money's going to give us things. So we do this equation where money's going to give us things and things going to equal happiness. How are you going to get money? Well, you're told from little that time equals money. So here's the equation. Time equals money. Money equals things. Things equal happiness. That's the consumer equation. It's oversimplified, but Tim Kasser, a psychologist, outlines this consumer equation that we all just simply identify with. We all somehow think that if we could, time equals money, if we had enough money, we'd have things, then we'd get happiness. This is the interesting thing about our culture. Is our culture happy? Well, no. Sadly, our culture is increasingly dissatisfied, even though we have more stuff than ever. And sadly, our culture is increasingly disconnected from one another. A guy called Oliver James, not Jamie Oliver. Jamie Oliver's a chef. Oliver James. He's written an interesting book called Affluenza. There's actually 3 books with the title Affluenza, but he wrote one of them. And he is looking at connectedness in cultures around the world. And as cultures identify more with consumer values, they are less connected to one another. What's going on with that? Well, one of the things I think is valuable for addressing consumer culture, and my PhD research, amongst other things, has a major factor in this concept of Sabbath. Why? Because on Sabbath, if we explore the concept of Sabbath keeping, on Sabbath, time doesn't equal money. Sabbath has a way of interfering with the underlying constructs of consumerism. The time equals money equation doesn't work on Sabbath because Sabbath is disconnecting from the world, in this case, the world of consumer culture, and it's reconnecting to something else. And that's what we're going to explore for a little bit. So in the whole Sabbath idea, I'm going to talk about things you detach from and things you attach to. And if I'm seeing the chat bar there, if you've got ideas as we talk about what you detach from and what you detach to. And I'm going to talk about some things that I detach from, but it's not just Sabbath's not just I won't do this or I'll disengage from this. The more important part is what that then provides space for me to engage in. So disengage, engage, detach, attach. What's that look like? I detach from media. On Sabbath, I take a break from my television and all the ads that fills. I take a break from reading the newspaper. I take a break from scrolling through my phone, even looking at whatever news site I might be looking at. Why? Because on Sabbath, I take a break from advertising. If you live in a Western culture, then 3,000 times a day, you're going to see messages from all over the place telling you that you don't have enough, your teeth need to be whiter, or you need a different product to wash your shirt in, your hair needs to be different, your skin needs to be different. You just need to be different. Advertising is designed to make me discontent, so it can then offer itself as the answer. So on Sabbath, I take a break from that. I take a break from where I'm going to get those messages that I'm not enough. Then I also take a break from this whole idea of producing commodity. I take a break from the need or the desire to get more things. I take a break from shopping. I don't go to the shops on Sabbath. Why? Because I'm taking a break from all the messages that gives me. I'm taking a break from the whole I need more thing. I'm taking a break from thinking that if I could get this, then I would be somehow a better version of myself. And that's the message, the incessant message that can so easily cloud us out because it's just coming at us all the time. Consumerism's always telling you know how it works. You get this, but then all of a sudden there's an upgrade. So you need that. You get this, but all of a sudden you need the new version or the better version. There's always something more. And it's that addiction to more that I'm taking a break from when I detach from media, when I detach from shopping. I detach from trying to produce more. In our culture, we value production more than anything, which is one of the reasons why we devalue people as they get older, which is one of the reasons why we're so keen to celebrate young people in our advertising, because we don't value non-production. Sabbath undermines that because on Sabbath, I take a break from producing more. I take a break from trying to run my business or take a break from trying to earn more. I just take a break and disengage. On Sabbath, you don't have employer or employee. On Sabbath, the Sabbath undermines the structures that our consumer culture promotes and that we so easily live in and take the message from. Deuteronomy 5:15, if you look in scripture, there's a book called Deuteronomy that includes a version of the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments are written in the Bible twice. One time in Deuteronomy, we're going to come to the other one in a minute too. And it says, hey, keep the Sabbath, because remember that you're not slaves in Egypt. God's talking about the Israelites who he took out of Egypt. And he's saying, I took you out of Egypt. You're no longer slaves. You're no longer slaves to making bricks for the Pharaoh. You're no longer slaves to this incessant need to just keep producing. You're a valuable, dignified person. Your value is not just in the sum of what you can produce in a given amount of time. So that's one of the reasons that the commandments uses for the value of Sabbath. You're not a slave. You're not a commodity. You're not simply about what you can produce. Your dignity is in a different story. So here's the thing. Sabbath is not so much about what I stop doing. The big thing is then what that frees up space to do. So I stop doing this, in this case, shopping and in media and the various things that all week grab my attention. I stop that so I can make margin, I can make space, I can attach to life at its best. In this case, what do I attach to? Well, I attach to a different story of what it is to be human. It's not just me as producer, it's me as someone who fits into this bigger narrative. I like to call it a divine narrative of not just what I can produce between now and the day I die. I have dignity and I'm here for relational connectedness. I'm here for connecting in community. Community is the opposite to consumerism. Consumerism can try and make branded community. Consumerism can try and produce what Zygmunt Bauman calls, a sociologist, he calls it pseudo-community, where it's not really deep community. It's community that tries to sell you a brand, or community that tries to act as if it's community, but deep community, deep relationships where people know me and where I am known, where I live in deep connectedness. Consumerism undermines community. Why? Because relationships take time. And you already know that time equals money equals things equals happiness. Relationships take time. And time is something that rushed, busy, consumer-driven people just don't have. That's why, as consumerism goes up, relationships and connectedness goes down. That's relationships with one another. That's relationships with your neighbor. It's relationships in your family. We talk about how relationships are important, but consumerism undermines that's important. So on the Sabbath, disengage to engage in what? In relationships. Sabbath is unhurried time where I can spend that with my kids. Sabbath is unhurried time with my family, with my wife. Sabbath's unhurried time with people who I can care about, who can care about me. Sabbath's also unhurried time to invest in getting to know people who I don't know yet. Sabbath is all about relationship. So I invest in relationship. What else do I invest in? Creation. I mentioned that the 10 Commandments are written twice in the Bible, but they're different. It does say honor the Sabbath both times. One of them, because you're slaves in Egypt. That's one we talked about. The other one, because I created you, God says. You're creation. You're created with dignity. You belong to a bigger story. Sabbath, now I can care about creation any day of the week, but Sabbath is a reminder to step back from incessant production and remember creation care, to affirm creation. Remember that creation is not simply part of a production line. Consumerism destroys creation. Consumerism uses creation as just another resource to produce, to mine, to exploit. Sabbath is all about giving that a break. Sabbath, imagine if creation had a day to regenerate. That's one thing. But for me, Sabbath attaches me to creation, so I do treat it differently, hopefully, do treat it differently throughout the week. So for me, that's when I engage in. I often will take a walk. I've heard Aaron talk earlier about, hey, take a walk. It's just a slow pace down. You can do that any day, but Sabbath intentionally makes a space for that because I've decluttered it, disconnected from the world. I've decluttered it from those things that often negate that. So Sabbath, I'm intentional about connecting with creation. Sabbath gives me the day. Oh, you've already heard that I'm into reptiles. Sabbath gives me the time when, hey, during the week I feed my reptiles. I'm actually going great. Sabbath, I just get the unhurried time to hold them, to play with them, to look at them, to learn from them, and just remember that I'm part of a big world of incredible creation that's not just there to exploit. Sabbath is about this bigger narrative, this bigger version. On Sabbath, I put a focus on serving. I can serve any day, but on Sabbath, I remember that I'm part of this humanity that I'm called to make a difference in. So Sabbath, I'm reminded of things that, hey, I could do that, but often I don't. Why? Because life has a way of negating those things. On Sabbath, I grow, I serve, I connect, I share, I worship. I remember that I belong to a different story. So Sabbath is, for me, disengage to engage. Sabbath is what an author, Walter Brueggemann, he wrote a book called The Sabbath as Resistance, saying no to the culture of now. Because Sabbath is countercultural. Sabbath goes against those very values, the time equals money value. Sabbath goes against those things that say you need more. Can you make a consumer Sabbath? Yes, you can. Sometimes you'll see the Sabbath promoted as, hey, keep your Sabbath, and you'll actually be more productive for the rest of the week. It ends up making the Sabbath a commodity in consumerism. However, the Sabbath is actually designed to promote humanity at its best and the values of relational connectedness, the values of worshiping beyond self, the values of serving, growing, sharing, worshiping. Sabbath is life at its best. It's detaching from this to get that. It's detaching from the culture of now and the incessant messages you need more to experience life outside of all that, where you get relational connectedness, you get relational richness, you get to be part of creation, you get to be part of community, and you get to be fully human. That's one of the reasons why I think disconnect from the world, in this case consumerism, and connect with what it is to be fully human and live life in a different story than the consumer story that our culture so often gives us. So that's why I see Sabbath as a gift. That's one of the reasons I see Sabbath as important. There's other things that can be used to address consumerism, but a major one for me is the whole idea of Sabbath. Thanks, Trent and Erin.
Thank you, Brendan. Like, that was a amazing talk. I was sitting back going, oh, wow. Yeah, wow. So thank you so much. That was amazing. I really appreciated that.
It really is life at its best. I loved that whole consumer equation that's flipped on its head, that in the Sabbath time, that time does not equal money, and that's where the benefit comes from, that you disengage to re-engage.
Yeah, that it's countercultural. That was it's something I'd never imagined the Sabbath to actually be, and that it can break us from this idea of consumerism. And
it just gives a break entirely. I actually, as part of my PhD, you present the different papers as to people who, from all kinds of backgrounds. I remember presenting a paper on how the Sabbath addresses consumerism. And there's one guy in the class, he says, slow down. He said, so we're all doing PhDs here. This is a PhD cohort. Yep. He said, are you trying to tell me that one day a week you don't touch your PhD? I'm saying, yes, I do. I disengage from doing my study. He says, I would feel too guilty if I did that.
Oh, wow.
And I said, however, what about if I have this day where I flip that and I'm not meant to do it? And he goes, what an amazing idea, that Sabbath, you take away this guilt of not doing, because you've already set it up to be, I am not going to do all that stuff I do during the week.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you would fill up the freedom with guilt-driven production. Whether it's a PhD, whether it's something else, you'd be thinking, I'm supposed to be doing this, I'm supposed to be producing, I'm supposed to be mowing the lawn, I'm supposed to be doing something else. The week's full of. So yeah, I just find it a wonderful idea. And as he said at the end, he goes, we all need Sabbath. I said, I would agree with you.
I think that's amazing, because I know people, when they study, they're like, oh, but I've got an assessment due next week. I can't have a day off. I can't not take that time off. And it's like, well, you can't afford not to take that time off. It's actually going to help you. I think this idea as well that the Sabbath, the community is talking to us about, like, advertisement is to make us content with our lives. Like, we're not happy with who we are, or not happy with what we have, or not happy with, like, advertisement is literally designed to make us unhappy, that we need more things to make us happy. I was like, wow, I never thought about that, but you're right. It always to show you the next best thing, or the biggest thing, or,
that you need their product.
You need their product, exactly.
How refreshing to take a break from that.
Love
I was
that.
also fascinated, Brendan, you made a comment about pseudo community that's found within consumerism. Can you just comment on the role of social media? Is it possible to have real community in social media, or is that pseudo community?
Well, pseudo community has the feel and texture of community. Social media, I think, is an expression of pseudo community. Now, keep in mind, social media can also be used for great good, where you reconnect or you are able to find out things that prompt you to embrace deeper relationship. So it can be used for great good, but for the most part, it's promoting a pseudo community. It's promoting pictures of what I want to market myself on social media. It ends up being my own little marketing campaign, so I can show you, look how good my life is, and you get discontent with my life, but in reality, you can show me your life, and we only show the best of that. So it does create that, but also brands want to promote themselves as communities, and so they talk about this brand community, and they. My PhD has a case study on the Lorna Jane community.
Oh wow.
And
Such a healthy concept of an exercise brand as well.
And is the Lorna Jane community really a community? If you're shifting houses, the Lorna Jane community going to come and help you shift? Probably not. It's this idea of community, and it's not inherently a bad thing in itself. It's just it calls itself community for a branded reason, and it misses the real texture of community, and it points to what we've lost. It points to the fact that knowing and being known is something that we've lost in our culture.
Yeah. Brendan, we've had a flood of questions come through the chat, and if you do have other questions, feel free to send them in as well. Just a couple of them to throw to you. How do you disconnect if you are retired? So you're not filling up your week with work, or maybe you're on holidays. So like every day is the Sabbath, if you're at the beach on holidays. What does disconnecting look like in a laid back setting as opposed to a full-time work setting?
Yeah, I think, and different stages of life, it's going to be entirely different, and different seasons of life, it's going to look different. I think in a season of life and retirement where you do have time on your hands, a wonderful season where you can serve and grow and connect and share and worship lots of times that don't get otherwise filled out by productivity. But the Sabbath offers you a spot for the intergenerational connection that can't happen so easily when your grandchildren are all at school or your neighbors are all at work. And so if I was in that space, I would get my gardening done or doctor's visits done, whatever. I'm making generalizations about what retired people do, and that's terrible. I'll get my shopping done. I'll get everything else done that retired people do, and make sure on the Sabbath, if I'm part of a worshiping community, then I invest my life into there, that I invest my life into intergenerational connection. I invest my life into connecting with those people that I'm probably not going to get the opportunity to connect with otherwise.
Yeah, no, that's lovely. I think that's a great way to look at the Sabbath time of connecting with the intergenerational. I've also got another question here for you, Brandon. We see in culture today as well this new movement, these ideas of decluttering one's life or to downsize with all of someone's possessions, or even this new tiny house movement. Do we see this sort of thing coming out because people are seeing the benefits?
Oh, for sure. And there are these downshifters, or that's what Clive Hamilton calls them in his book, Affluenza, downshifters, or people, tiny house, people who intentionally choose lifestyles that don't have so much stuff. Interestingly enough, it doesn't necessarily address consumerism. Why? Because consumerism is not how much stuff you have or don't have. It's your attachment to what you don't own yet. So interestingly enough, a guy called Richard Dennis has written a fascinating book on this, and he's saying that some of these downsizing things actually encourage you to throw away more stuff and consume, discard quicker, and not hold that stuff you're discarding. You're still attached to what you don't own yet. It's just what you don't own yet is still there. You're just getting rid of that. He actually says, what about if you actually got really attached to what you own, so you're not trying to get more? So it doesn't necessarily mean that, but the downshifting, good thing if you're using it to detached from those consumer messages. Now, also keeping in mind, consumerism isn't inherently bad.
Yeah.
We're going to consume. We're going to buy clothes. We're going to buy things. You're going to buy. It's not inherently a bad thing. So it's not as if it's say, hey, let's detach and all go and live on an anti-consumerism commune. That sounds nice, by the way. You are going to consume. It's just what's that doing to your sense of self, meaning, purpose, and direction? Have you tied yourself, your better version of yourself, have you tied that into those purchases or those commodities? Or are you able to see through that and go, I need this, but the brand is not me? It's so consumerism itself consumerism has a lot of good things.
Yeah.
But it also subtly has our meaning and purpose commodified. We turn people into commodities, we turn experience into commodities, and we miss out on the relational richness because of it.
It's really keeping that perspective, isn't it? And I loved you mentioned the unhurried time in relationships, that you don't have to feel guilty for spending time with your loved ones. You don't have to feel guilty spending time with your spouse or your kids, being out in nature when normally during the week you're like, I should be reading a textbook. And back on that earlier point, my parents said to me growing up, Erin, no one ever failed their HSC because they kept the Sabbath, because they didn't study on the Sabbath. Like, God really blesses those who honor that day. And you have more bountiful relationships, like better quality of time during the week. And just that real perspective, I think, was powerful tonight. Thank you.
It helps you recalibrate around what matters. In my little chat bar, and Erin, Trent, Michael asked a question, does a husband feel guilty about spending time with his wife? On Sabbath, don't feel guilty. Even spending time with wife is a wonderful thing, but consumerism undermines that. Consumerism does make you think. And I blame consumerism for everything, by the way. So you've got to keep in mind that we've always had dysfunctions in our culture. There's always an ism. Consumerism is just our culture's iteration of selfishness. That's institutionalized selfishness. That's always been the problem. Consumerism honors that. So I guess, yeah, consumerism, I think, does destroy marriages because it does remove us from the time of relational richness. So Michael, your little question there, does a husband feel guilty spending time with his wife? Hope not, especially on Sabbath, not.
Yeah, definitely.
Brendan, just as we wrap up our Q&A time, some practical tips that our listeners can take away from tonight. Practical steps.
Yeah, sure. And it's not just because our topic is Sabbath, but I think one of the most practical steps is Sabbath for undermining consumerism. Other practical steps, getting involved in serving, living a life beyond yourself. Consumerism tells you to focus on self. The serving helps you remember to focus on others. Just be aware of what advertising is trying to do to you. And sometimes just stop and think. What am I becoming? What am I giving my life to? Am I a more generous, gracious person, or have I become more self-centered and or more selfish? Just thinking through, is advertising is advertising trying to take me somewhere that's not a healthier place? So just being intentional, thinking, and just being reminded of why you're on this planet, spending time in creation, just slowing down. And as I say, the opposite of consumerism is community. Consumerism will take any system. Consumerism will take anti-consumerism and turn it into a commodity to be used for profit. But consumerism finds it does. You get anti-consumerism groups, and pretty soon Sony has signed them up and they're singing their songs, and pretty soon their T-shirts are being sold. Consumerism will take any system for its consumable ends. But consumerism finds it very difficult to take community and turn it to consumable, because community is about unhurried relational richness. So when you embrace community, when you embrace connectedness, which I think is the big deal on Sabbath, when you embrace that, then that's one of the best tips for undermining consumerism.
Awesome.
Unreal. Hey, Brendan, thank you so much for the time that you have shared with us tonight. We would love to encourage everyone who's viewing this right now to take up the Sabbath challenge. Trent, talk us through that.
Yeah, so once again, this program, we are challenging our listeners to take up the Sabbath challenge. You can see right there on the screen the QR code. We know how to use them. Just scan the QR code or go to the website. There it will give you a layout of what the Sabbath is, the Sabbath challenge is, and we are encouraging you to take it. So for the month of July, we would encourage you to take the Sabbath challenge, to take one 24-hour period off and do something different. So a break from work, a break from consumerism, from shopping, a break from media and the consumption of media, which would be your advertisements and stuff as well. But then to go and read a book, write a book, write a journal, something, go bushwalking, get out in creation like Brendan just shared with us, have a picnic with family and not feel guilty about that time, or go visit friends, especially people that might feel lonely, serve them and be present for them. But as well, if you want to connect with people in a community that have been practicing the Sabbath, that have been receiving the blessing of this for years, we encourage you to go to this, to the website as well, but also to scan this QR code, and it will show you your local Sabbath keeping church that you can go and connect with that community and build some great relationships with them, and to learn about how the Sabbath has been a blessing to them for their life. So once again, we encourage you to take up the Sabbath challenge for the month of July, receive the blessing that it can be, and you won't want to stop. It will become something that you will continue to keep for the remainder of your life because you'll love it. Erin, what are you going to be doing for your Sabbath this weekend?
Well, for this Sabbath this weekend, we are heading to our local Sabbath keeping church tomorrow morning.
Mm-hmm.
And then after being involved there and serving, we're going to head and visit someone who's sick in the afternoon, which we're really looking forward to catching up with them and shedding some love down there. Why don't you guys put into the chat what you guys are doing tomorrow? What are you doing for your Sabbath? So while we are adding those comments into the chat, next Friday night at 7 p.m, please join us again for our third installment of the Sabbath Gift. We're going to hear from Nathan Brown, who's the editor of the Science Publishing, and also Pastor Moy Stiles. They're going to talk about rediscovering community and connection, and doing that in the frame of social justice. So we're really looking forward to that next Friday night.
So please come and join us again next Friday night. But once again, big thank you to Dr. Brendan Pratt for his time and his message. And we really hope you guys will take up that Sabbath challenge and join us.
Thanks so much, Brendan. See you, everyone.
See ya.